Without further ado, please help me in welcoming a community favorite, obviously, Richard Scheuerman.
Well, I threatened to use my junior high voice, and who needs a microphone, but it's nice to have a good group out, and I think under the acoustical situation, I probably should use the mic, so I shall. And hope you can hear. If not, raise your hand, throw a tomato, and it'll get my attention. Welcome. I'm humbled to have you here. It's like reunion time for me, seeing you in the audience all the way from I wasn't going to name names, but I see my elementary school competitive coach, Craig Feenan, over there. And, Craig and I talk history whenever we get together, and I can take it all the way through to friends just in recent weeks here that have come across my trail. And I'm deeply grateful you've come. It's an important story, and in some ways a story less known, and through the perspectives that I'd like to share with you. By way of a couple words of introduction, I hesitate to name names here because it's just like I want to say a word about every one of you. You've greatly enriched my life in many ways, from friends from my youth to, as I said, just folks I've come to know in recent months that have come to see us. Bob, I think you get the record for coming all the way from Alaska. I'll humble myself by thinking you came for this, but I think you had other reasons. And anyway, thank you for all of you for what you meant to me. Thanks, Christy, for the chance to be here. I've come to the room and seen some of the previous exhibits, and hats off to you, Gary and Trudy, and all those who have stepped up to really make this room a wonderful commons. I've been writing about commons recently in this series on agrarian arts and literature, and the importance of that word in our day. I want to be sure to acknowledge my mother. Mary is here in the back row. Gee, Mom, come on, should they have the front row seat? My sister Deb, and I won't reveal Mom's age, but she told me she doesn't like going to as far as Moscow because it just takes a little while to drive that far. And yet when we had we've had a family reunion every year for at least the 1920s, I think. And we go to different parts of the state. You know, if your last name sounds German, you love sauerkraut and sausage, you got to get together and compare who made the best, last year. And so we're doing that. And Mom thought, Vancouver's a little ways to go, but last reunion was on Saturday. And so Thursday, after telling us this probably wouldn't happen all spring, she said, they're nice enough to come up here and see us, so I'm going after all. And all the way down the back of one day. And so Mom, hats off to you for your devotion to all things heritage and family. Mom was never preachy to us growing up about, the ethic of reading and studying. She lived by example. Mom was a reader. Mom's been a reader all her life, and growing up, in the tiny communities where we are here in the Palouse country, it's kind of inspiring as I think back in my youth, because hey, we had lots of people all over the place. We would come and see other cousins, family members, but we actually had a library. Mom had a library. And my dad was so proud of the bookshelves that he built for her in our tiny living room. And so that's where I first got to know John Steinbeck and Willie and the War and all these things. She was a member of the book club of some kind. I don't know what, but these strange things would come periodically to our house. And she's been an example of that to us ever since, and still reads. Of course, it's Danielle Steele, Mom. We may need to talk to her. But what an example. This library has been an example of enriching lives, young and old alike. It was a big highlight for me as a kid, and in the binges and Ralstons of the world when the Whitman County Bookmobile would come, right? Every Thursday, the Endicott, man, I was like, holy cow, a holiday! And we would go out and knew the staff, and I was kidding Gary over there about how wonderful a generous donation he and Trudy made this example. And I just want to set the record straight. I've done my part with overdue fines for over 7 years. And that was a great thing. We lived out in the country. We lived on a country road between the little towns of St. John and Endicott out near the Palouse River, and not too far down from the Feenan Ranch. And so we didn't get to town a lot in the summer. I was never part of. I was kind of envious of the city kids who could be part of those summer library programs and stuff. But I have a very distinct memory of a kind of turning point when the light went on about the significance of libraries like this and topics like we're here. I better get moving here, right? You didn't come to hear me reminisce. I have no notes, so you can throw that second tomato if you'd like to before I get off the task. But I was visiting with my aunt, Una Mae Huntley Scheuerman, who many of you remember, a very knowledgeable community and family elder. And I couldn't have been more than 12 or 13 years old. Somehow we were talking about our people's origins coming to this land from Russia in the 1880s. And she said, well, it was pretty tough with that generation because unlike the nice homes that we all grow up in, they first lived in holes in the ground. And I had never heard that. And I asked, what do you mean by that? And she said, yeah, they lived in earth homes, and I can show you where this one is. There's still a very physical remnant of it. And I said, how did you find out about this stuff? And she said that a fellow named Gordon Lendine had come down from probably then WSC in the 1950s, and had been interviewing area elders in the Colfax, Endicott, St. John, La Crosse area about the good old days, and that he had written about this stuff. It was an unpublished thesis on the history of the area. And Christy, that's my first conscious memory of making a pilgrimage to the library. I wanted to get that book, and there were only a couple copies of it. But I never forgot that, and it made such an impression on me that when I went to WSU in my freshman year, I looked up in the telephone directory just by chance to see if Mr. Lendine was still around, and he was. And the reason I was curious was because it referenced a number of oral histories, unpublished oral history. And so I, called him stone cold and said who I was and a nobody but interested in heritage. And he said, I was just getting ready to throw out all those recordings. My wife can't stand having the garage filled with all that stuff. So if you want them, hey, come on over, Richard. So I did, and wow, I put that on the recording, and here I hear Philip Oakes. Dale will remember Philip Oakes and these old timers. You might remember Marlowe. It was kind of a horse whisperer families that we had. They were quite the characters, rodeo kings in the old days. And I remembered Philip as a boy. We were afraid of Philip because we had all these tall tales about him. He was like John Wayne in the flesh, and he wore this big, great brim hat, and so to hear the voice was very special to me. And that opened a big door. that opened a big door, and I've been walking through that hallway of memory and meaning ever since, to the extent that I can. And people like you have greatly enriched my journey, and I'm grateful for you coming here. I wanted to share some things that maybe you haven't encountered yet about the story of our region's first peoples and how that relates to Nona's magnificent artwork, and just share perspectives. And I'll kind of race through these. I'll tell you, I have to, because every image here is a big story. I was very selective in what I wanted to present to you, and so I have to avoid getting wedded to a particular picture or two. So I'll go through and give you some highlights, and then if you have some questions afterwards, we can visit a little about that. Lori, my good friend, my cousin Lori Brown here is at WSU Press. So we have lots of fun catching up on things when I'm up there, and my closing credit is to WSU Press. WSU has patiently put up with my manuscripts over many years, and I've got to present an unpaid political announcement here for the Chief Kamiakin book and the Snake River Palouse book, because if you are interested in these themes, Lori brought some brochures here from WSU Press that have these listed, and I'm happy to promote all the competition. Let me tell you, there's a lot of other books there about regional pioneer history that are very enriching, and they keep up with new titles on a regular basis. And I have a new one coming out this fall on our immigrant folks coming here to this area called Hardship to Homeland. And so if you have interest, happy to share later about that. Well, this is about a legendary name. I mean, Kamiakin is everywhere. You can't look at a map of the Pacific Northwest and not encounter a name that is synonymous with greatness among the native peoples. I actually think it was the founder of Colfax, Mr. Perkins, who felt that since Steptoe had a substantial landform named for him in Whitman County, it was only appropriate, since he lost the battle, that Chief Kamiakin, leader of the Confederated Tribes, had a place named for him. He was nicknamed Kamiak, and not far from where I grew up, just up by my good friend and neighbor Louise's farm there, right where the road between St. John and Endicott crosses, was known in the old days as Kamiak's Crossing. That's where the family turned to in exile after the wars. But by the way, the one and only time, I'm probably violating the Native American Artifacts Protection Act by confessing this to you, but when I heard that, I went down to see old Philip Jenkins, who had lived there forever when I was young. And I asked him if he had heard how historically significant his backyard was, because that's where the family had pitched their teepees back from the 1860s on. And he said, well, you know, I didn't really know that family, Richard, but you know, every few years since back in the 1920s, these old Indians would come down here and ask to put a teepee up for a day or two. And he said, you know, I never really knew what that was about, but of course I let them come. And in later years, by the way, I found out very specifically who those families were and why they came to this part of Whitman County. It's quite a bittersweet story. So Philip was leading me up to where there's an old barn there when he was telling me this. And I said, so do you ever find any evidence of their being here? And he said, oh yeah, take a look at this box down here by the doorstep. And he had all mortars and pestles and all this stuff. And so we walked up to the barn, and I just glanced on the ground, And I found the most beautiful projectile point I've ever found in my life. It was made out of opal. I'm thinking maybe it came from Pine City. I don't know. There's some opal deposits up there. But it's beautiful. I am happy to report it's back in the hands of the rightful owner. But in any event, that evidence of their life is everywhere. If you travel White Pass, going over to Cowlitz Country, you'll go by Kamiakan Mountain. There's Kamiak Lake. There's all these places all across the region. And if you look at a map of the Pacific Northwest and see the reservations, you'll notice a peculiar pattern here, won't you? You know, look at the Palouse country and take a look at this constellation of yellow where the reservations are. It's like in a clock all the way around it, isn't it? Yeah. Because there was a conscious effort to dispossess the native peoples of this land because it's very valuable, it's very fertile. They knew this, by the way. In the 1850s treaty councils, Kamiakan kept referring to this very area as his garden. And you know, Governor Stevens was so frustrated in his negotiations with the tribes they counseled for 2 weeks. He wanted to get this famous name on the treaty to give it legitimacy. And today you can see the treaty, by the way. It's at the new Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian. And there is an X there next to Kamiakan's name. And I described in Renegade Tribe about you know, to what extent that X might be valid. I do believe he signed the treaty, but for reasons that we might need to go into more detail to understand. It was basically a fait accompli. He knew it was going to be potential annihilation or nothing without some accommodation. And this so frustrated Stevens because it was a land deal for Stevens. You know, hey, listen, we're going to give you this much money, we're going to build you houses, give you some free school for the kids, just sign here. And Kamiakan and Looking Glass and the other great leaders of the Nez Perce and Umatillas and Cayuse, they would say, you can read these in the text of the treaty negotiation, because they kept a verbatim transcript. And you know, he'll give this lecture to them about the benefits that's waiting materially. And then one of the chiefs will stand, like Kamiakan, and say, I want to know what the earth is saying about this. And Stevens just can't handle that kind of talk. You know, come on, this is a business deal here. And that's why this was such a tense time. This is a religious issue to the native people. Whether we're talking about land or salmon or any of many topics. It's not an economic issue. This is an aspect of sacredness to them. He came from a large family, and we have only recently come to know the exact places on the lower Snake River where Kamiakan's ancestors dwelled. And someday, if you're down in the Tri-Cities, give me a call. We were just down about 3 weeks ago with some of the elders who showed us where the famous horse race track is that kind of set the Kamiakan family off in legend. They were famous horse racers. But his father was a man of very small means, a great horse racer, but no material wealth. And so people would often bet on his horse. And he found a steed like he had never found in his life. And guess who didn't come back when they went around the corner of the racetrack? He kept going with that horse. He was never going to trade that thing to anybody else. And that's how the Kamiakan clan got over to Yakima country. These are very famous names that you see in Northwest history. His uncles, Tiayash, Auhai, murdered down here by Starbuck. Many of these people, by the way, have very tragic lives because of trying to reach an accommodation with the newcomers. This is our family. Kamiakan was related on two sides to some of the most prominent Yakima Plateau chiefs. Number 9, Kamunsi, was his father's wife. Siyak was the Palouse Nez Perce regional elder here, home country up by Cheney, and it's been really interesting to track down these favorite places that they have. Three of the most prominent were near the mouth of the Palouse River. Some of you are old enough like me to remember the old campground down there. There's a graveyard. Only in the last few years have those grave items been returned to the tribes. I took part in a reburial service there not long ago. That was the heart of the Snake River Palouse Nation. The word Palouse, by the way, you'll see a lot in the literature about it coming from this French term, maybe. It kind of sounds like that. It means a rolling lawn. Sorry to disappoint you. This has nothing to do with the French trappers here. Palouse, P-A-L-U-S, is a Sahaptin word that means something sticking in the water, and it was the heart, it was the stone heart of ancient beaver who carved out much of this back in the time of the animal people. Sadly, a lot of the rock was blown up when the river was made safe for steam navigation over 100 years ago. These are all scenes that were well known to the family, but they loved their life in the Palouse country. That was a favorite place. Later on, by the way, was homesteaded under the terms of the Indian Homestead Act by many members of the Kamiakin family. Another one was Kamiakin's Crossing. Okay, that's where they relocated after the war period in the 1850s. He was a man without a country. He was a man without a country. He was hunted by all sides. He was in a failed cause from the beginning. I've said many times the fate of the Indian Wars was decided a lifetime before Kamiakin, because the virulent epidemics that swept the Pacific Northwest so decimated the native peoples by the 1820s and 1830s. Their fate was virtually sealed by then. So a generation later, you have very proud traditionalists like Kamiakin, but they're facing an impossible task. And as you can see here in the images that Nona has so beautifully painted, there was overwhelming force that Wright brought to bear after the very embarrassing defeat of Edward Steptoe. Some of you I saw pausing when you came in at the painting of Horse Slaughter Camp, way over in the corner. And I've had many tribal elders that I have brought and showed Nona's good work. I'll figure out this soon. And here we are 150 years after these events, and they will become emotional looking at that painting. It's deeply disturbing to them that we could annihilate 1,000 head of horses just because of a military advantage. He had a third place. The third home was at the foot of Rock Lake. And many of you know that mysterious, majestic place in the north central Palouse. And that's ultimately where the family settled, because everywhere they would go, even after the war, even after the treaty had guaranteed them rights in this land, they kept being pushed out. They kept being pushed out and ultimately settled there. He is buried there. And there's a small family graveyard that's up to the east of the foot of the lake. And to add insult to injury, Kamiakin's grave was desecrated a year after his death by so-called artifact hunters. And to this day, his skull has never been returned to the family. Mount Rainier was the site of his spirit quest. He ranged far and wide. And even as a youth, he was singular in his courage and heroism. You know, people would go around here to places like Steptoe Butte for a spirit quest. A sign of adolescence, going into manhood or girlhood. You would go to a remote place and fast and have a revelation, a personal revelation through some natural force, a natural power that would bestow on you a certain strength when I first talked to a wonderful elder named Emily Pion, and when I only mentioned the word Steptoe Butte, she said, "My Power Mountain." And those were beautiful places, remote places before our Euro-American culture came that were sacred to these people. Kamiakin is one of the few Indian leaders, Indian of any background, that I ever heard ascended Mount Rainier for his spirit quest. You can see in the Autanum country where he grew to manhood, displays and sculpture there because, of course, he was that prominent leader of the Plateau people named Yakima, Palouse, in the treaty councils of 1850s, but in many ways he spoke for a much broader area. One of the very first references we have to him is through this peripetitious traveler, Theodore Winthrop, who passed through here before the wars of the 1850s. He was here in 1852. And already look at the character that he is expressing to them. They're talking of Kamiakin. He approached on a white pacer, wearing a long robe of ceremony with fine cloth, patches of all shapes and sizes. You know, when I first read this, I thought of Joseph in the Old Testament. He had an imposing presence and bearing, above all a good face, at the top of a colossal frame. He was every inch a king. Stevens recognized this. He wanted Kamiakin's signature on that treaty because he knew Congress would consider it a sham if some other more lesser respected native people were signing on behalf of the tribes. And this led to an incredibly tense, almost violent encounter the night before the treaties were basically dictated to the leaders that they needed to sign, or, according to the translator, they would walk knee-deep in blood. Kamiakin reluctantly showed up at Stephen's tent the next morning and added his X without saying anything and left. And it did the trick. Congress did approve the treaties, but Kamiakin knew from that moment their fate was actually sealed in spite of it being called a peace treaty. He had a large family, as was not unusual among Plateau lives. Plateau leaders had several wives. And I wanted to know, what happened to them? Are they still with us? Do they have a story to tell us? Because when you read a lot of printed accounts, the government accounts tend to give you, the Euro-American perspective on Native American approaches to life, way, and decisions about their presence here. And you can see some of these dates, of course, go back far into the 19th century. But also look down here at the children of his favorite wife, Callista, Tomio and Tomomolo. Tomomolo died very young by Hangman Creek. Was drowned there accidentally as a child. But Tomio lived into the 1900s. And you will see that Tesh Palouse living also into the 1930s, and Pio Pio Kaunat, Cleveland Kamiakin, living till 1959. Another reason why I so want to celebrate the good work that Christy and the staff do here at libraries is because there are all of these treasures waiting to be found. Now, a lot of them are out there and all properly cataloged, but every now and then, if you keep digging, you'll find something that will open up an incredible new world of understanding that gives meaning and beauty and memory to our existence. There's a lot of things we can celebrate materially in our culture. Lois knows I like a nice wine with my meal sometimes. We just got the house painted. I mean, there are things that appeal to us in our day and age in material terms. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm here to tell you that whether it's a fine Bordeaux or the new color we chose for the house, I would not call that meaningful. I would not call that memorable in the finest sense of the word. When I find someone's perspective about those words that can enrich my understanding and appreciation of the special places we call home, that to me is worth celebrating and worth understanding. So when we were nearing the completion of the Finding Chief Kamayakan book, this particular volume, we would actually, I had already submitted the manuscript to WSU Press, and I got this call late in the afternoon, this was just a few years ago, from a librarian at the Ellensburg Public Library. And he says, hey Richard, I hear you've been working on this book about the Plateau Indian Wars and Chief Kamayakan, and I don't know how relevant this is to you, but this past week we started cataloging our old voice recordings, our oral histories of one-room country school teachers from the 1920s and 30s. And of course, as I'm hearing this, I'm wondering, what does that have to do with my interest in the Plateau Indian Wars? And he says, well, you'll never guess what we found in these. Somehow misfiled is a recording that's labeled Chief Cleveland Kamayakan. And he said, we put it on the recorder, and I'm here to tell you, other than the opening line with his name, we can't make hide nor hair of what is being said. This is in some ancient language, and it goes on and on and on. And if you're interested in it, hey, come and get it, because it's useless to us. I'm not going to say his name. He was such a nice guy, and I've never heard of anybody handing me something from a public library and just saying, take this. I did return a copy to him and to the tribal archives in the Northwest, several of them. But of course, I had they had already transferred it to a cassette, and so later I'm driving home, and I couldn't wait any longer. And I had a cassette player in the car, and so I put it on, and just like, and I can make out a couple Sahaptin words, but not much. But just to hear the voice, of Cleveland Kamayakan was incredible. By the way, in his time, he was very, very highly regarded. One of the founders of the National Congress of American Indians. Was born in Whitman County. Was born at Rock Lake. And so when I hear this, I thought, wow, we need a translation. So I took a detour on the road and headed down to the Yakima Nation, where I knew some elders still fluent in Sahaptin, and called ahead of time. Hey, I really want to see you about this, and something pretty special. And by the way, do you know we have 100,000 people visiting Palouse Falls now? It used to be 25,000. And then thanks to the kids in, I think, Washtuckna School, right? And our Binge friends, they nominated it to be the official state waterfall. Now it's over 100,000 people. And pretty special. I was just down there the other day. In any event, so I go, and I'm pretty pumped on this thing, and the never-ending saga. And so I go to my good friend Terry Jim Schuster and put this tape in there, and it was maybe 7:30 at night. And the second Cleveland's voice was heard by Carrie, she started tearing up. She remembered him from the 1940s and 50s, and what a remarkable presence he had so long been. And then she interrupted me and said, "You have to turn it off," which was a little disappointing. I'd come a long way. And so, well, okay. So I turned it off. And she said, you know, Richard, we cannot listen to this when the sun is down. In our culture, voices of the departed can ghost a house. And so we have to wait till the morning because I cannot listen to this. So guess who got a hotel in Yakima? And the next morning got a complete translation. Called WSU, hold the presses. We got to add a little bit here, but there's still more. We found a second recording, by the way, about the same time. So there's always more to tell, you see, which is why I'm so encouraged tonight to see a lot of you here without the gray hair that I have, because there are stories, very important stories, yet to tell. I do believe this is a photograph of Kamayakan. It's the only photograph reputably known to likely be him. And there's a lot to unpack in that photograph, so I'm not going to go into all that right now. But you'll notice a few peculiarities, right? There's no great Sioux headdress, right? You know, those things we associate with tribal leaders were not known to Plateau culture. That's very typical of the old style Columbia Plateau look. The quirt and this incredible gorget below his neck. I'm wearing a very small one, and these are Hudson's Bay cobalt faceted trade beads. And we were recently in Russia and had a good time learning about some of these intermixed with amber. And these are quite old, but that's typical for what a native leader would have been wearing pre-1850s. When Isaac Stevens met him at the Treaty Council, he described him as a peculiar man, reminding me of the panther and the grizzly. His countenance of extraordinary play. One moment he frowns, the next in smiles, flashing his bright and black as a rebus the same instant. The Treaty Council was held in Walla Walla. There was no town there at that time. And the valley had been an ancient gathering place in springtime for root digging and other aspects of traditional life way. And these very frustrating 2 weeks of deliberations that finally led to this agreement. Lawrence Kipp kept a day-to-day journal that's fascinating reading. He said that Kamayakan had been the great impediment in the way of any cession of Indian lands. With more far-reaching vision than the rest, he probably saw that this surrender of their lands would be the final step. When the cessions were finally codified, you'll notice an interesting phenomenon here. Earlier the slide showed you in the yellow where the reservations were that presently exist. They're based on the 1850s treaty. This map shows you what they had to give up. This shows you what the Indian Claims Commission relatively recently, in 1960s, ruled was what they surrendered, and in many cases were not fairly compensated for, even by 1850s standards. The interesting thing I want to show you, which is I devote an entire chapter in the book to this, is after the tragedies of the war, what happened to them? Because the family were outcasts, even among their own people, because the war had been lost, which he knew at the beginning was probably going to be the result. But where do you go? Where do you go? You're a man in a family without a country, and you saw how big the family was. He had 5 wives, he had children, he had grandchildren, and after almost single-handedly, with a group of very proud leaders, fighting the entire Northwest contingent of the U.S. Army, and by the way, almost winning, what was left as an outcast. And I find it very interesting that when this was all finished in 1858, by the way, he is forced by the Army across the Rocky Mountains, and he lives in exile there for a year and a half. And when finally the Army sends an emissary and says, would you please come back and be the head chief, because there is such chaos on the reservations. We need somebody like you who everybody respects. And once again, we'll pay you this, we'll build you this, on and on and on. And there's this famous line where he's at Rock Lake, and he holds his sleeves up, and they're all ragged. And I may have this quote here where he talks about, I may not have much here to you, but I have my pride and my dignity, and I will live an independent life. Look where he goes. I don't think this is by coincidence. These men and women knew this land intimately. They knew where the buttes were. They knew the rivers. They knew the borders that had been specified in the treaty for the cessions. They knew this like the back of their hand. So when I compared his travels post-1858 with the language of the treaty on the cessions, I found it very interesting that here is where he goes. Here's the Palouse River, where the A is, the northernmost point of the Palouse River, near Matlock Ridge. That's where he pitches his teepees. It's not by accident, you see. He's telling the U.S. government, we gave away all this. But that's my land. I never surrendered anything from the Palouse River to the Canadian border. It's just as if he put his toe across, you see, and proudly said, this is my land. By the way, his words were affirmed by the senior Indian agent to the Pacific Northwest, who told people of the Euro-American pioneer era not to tamper with him because of what he had done and what he had lived through and how he had tried to keep the peace. The photographs that you see around us of Nona's incredible work, including several original paintings, chart the course of the battle sequence in the 1850s. And you can look at them, and there is text on these that I put together with Nona. So if you want to really drill down on a particular battle or place of battle, you can get additional details. We were right in the middle of the action. The Palouse country was ground center for this, even though the spark that set it all off actually happened down in the lower Columbia country, and later on, the murder of the chief Indian agent for the Pacific Northwest, who had been sent by Governor Stevens to investigate what was going wrong after the treaty, Andrew Boland. Because of his murder, Kamiakin was immediately blamed. He had to have done it because he's the one who left the council right off the bat and clearly was upset with the arrangements. Kamiakin had nothing to do with Boland's murder, but convenient often to blame somebody to shift the guilt. A lot of vitriolic language in the Northwest press against the Native peoples in the war period. No leniency or quarter should be given. We trust they'll be rubbed out, blotted from the existence. The old Levitical law should have full and free force. Prominent political leaders invoked religious legitimacy, political legitimacy, all kinds of reasons why they felt that we should have ultimate domain. By the way, in violation of the fact that the Supreme Court had decided in the 1820s that Native people were sovereign nations of the Pacific Northwest. This was Kamiakin's response. You fired the first shot. Our heart is broken. By the way, this letter was only recently discovered. There is so much material from the military and political white European perspective. It's quite interesting when you see documents from the Native perspective because they get a whole different side of light on it. There's only one breath left in us. We didn't have the strength to answer. We took common cause to defend our nationality. We have hearts and self-respect. There are still a number of places from that period that you can visit today to transport you back in time. Fort Simcoe, it's a little remote, But if you have an extra 30 minutes or so and you're in Yakima country, you can head out to where those structures were put together because of the 1850s wars. A little off the beaten track, but it will transport you back in time. And then, of course, after Steptoe's defeat, Colonel George Wright comes out with a massive show of force to obliterate this embarrassment on the American military's record, and goes all the way up, of course, to the Battle of Spokane Plains, which is marked today, if you've been by Fairchild Air Force Base, on the far, actually it's right across the highway from the main north entrance on the highway to Reardon. Yeah, there's a pyramid there, and that's within about a quarter of a mile of the famous painting of George Wright looking out over the battlefield. Maybe you've seen this sketch by Gustavus Sohan, and that's where that battle took place. Well, a lot of consequences after the tragedy of the war. These people's favored places no longer permitted to see with the kind of freedom that they once had. They were used to going places to hunt, to gather berries and roots, and now there are fences. I mentioned the quote from Park Winans, the Indian agent of the Northwest in 1871, found him here in Whitman County living at Rock Lake. He lifted his arms to show his ragged sleeves. This is after he has been promised all these gifts to just come back to the reservation, take over, put things in order. There's so much chaos. He says, I'm a poor man, but I'd rather have the government indebted to me than to be indebted to the government. Here's Teshpaloose, his son who lived until the 30s. Skolumki is the one who came back here, came to Colfax, came to Matlock Bridge. He's the one who Philip Jenkins met in his youth and would come back regularly to camp in the place where his family had lived, where his mother, by the way, is buried. Tommy O's son became a wealth of information for me, visiting with them. We'll have to save that, Christy, for another time about how I came to know members of this family. I'll just conclude with a quick anecdote about that. I had been looking for a long time for a personal inroad. In anthropology, we call these people folk brokers, somebody who can broker your introduction to a different culture. And let me tell you, you may drive on a highway and see the sign that says Nez Perce or Yakima or Coeur d'Alene Indian Reservation. You can fly right through. But you are entering a different dimension of thinking and existence that may not be immediately perceptible. And I had just about given hope of finding somebody who had actually grown up here, like these families, that could tell me first-person accounts of what had happened to them. And once again, it was the library to the rescue. I was attending a very boring education conference, once again in Ellensburg. And, what do you do if you're kind of a nerdy guy like me? You go visit the library. And so there I was, captive audience, and I go to the 970s. I always see what new is there in regional history that I haven't seen. And here's this little white and blue book, and it had a Sahapton title, but a subtitle in English was something like The Way Things Were. And so I'm looking through this thing, and on the table of contents it says, Origin of Palouse Falls. It says, oh, that looks kind of interesting. And so I read this thing, and at the end it says who the narrator is. Mary Jim Chapman. And so I go to the appendix, and who is this person? And it says, Mary Jim Chapman, one of the original Palouse people who was raised on the lower Snake River, da-da-da-da-da. So, boy, in a minute, I'm back to calling whoever I can, and is she still alive? And, well, we don't know. And da-da-da-da-da. Finally, we were just talking about Wanapum tonight here somewhere, Amy, I think. Yeah, I called Rex Buck over at Wanapum, who I didn't know very well, but he was kind enough to say, yeah, she's up in years, but, she lives over near Parker by Yakima, and entrusted me with her phone number. So I just call her, total dead call. And this very sweet, cherubic voice that sounded like maybe somebody 6 years old said hello. And I said, "Is your mother there?" And the voice on the other end of the line said, "She's been gone a long time." It was Mary Jim, and she invited me down for a visit. And these are the kinds of treasures that came from that. Introductions to the Kamayakan family. Many of them are here. I won't go through identifying all these people for you, but this is a rodeo gathering about 1910 in Wilbur, when they would all come from the reservations, come back home. They loved coming back to the Palouse country, or places like Wilbur that were close by that had rodeos, and they'd have these grand gatherings. And through Mary Jim, and working on a new manuscript, by the way, related to their life growing up here, which kind of takes it deeply into the 20th century, you see. And so now that has turned into a wonderful story that we're wanting to tell from their perspective about what happened in the generation after the war period, leading right now to us in the 21st century. Mary told me one time, "They say we're all gone, but we're still here." The saga continues, and we were not able to put the full story in the book of a phone call that reached us just when we were finishing the manuscript of, and I'll close with this, you've been so patient and kind here. We got a call when the book was finished from a fellow in Germany who had found out that the name Broncho had a blood association with the Kamayakan family, that the next generation had gone to the Colville Indian Reservation. That's where a substantial number of the Palouse band live today. They live in an Espila area. And I had remembered seeing a grave marker for Philip Broncho. And I knew the date 1945 was on the stone because I was trying to track down the family connections, and he was in the Kamayakan plots in the cemetery. And I was driving home, and I thought about that date, and I don't know that I have the date listed there. It was December or January of 44, excuse me, and so I was thinking Battle of the Bulge. And I learned soon afterwards that, in fact, Philip Broncho, like many members of the Kamayakan family, served proudly in World War II. By the way, the Native American population of the United States has the highest percentage of enlistment of any ethnic group in the U.S. military. They're patriots. They're patriot warriors. And Philip Broncho, if you know anything about the Battle of the Bulge, when our troops were surrounded by the German army during that winter, were cut off from all their supply lines, and this little village of Noville was about 5 miles to the east of Bastogne. And as the German army swept closer and closer, Philip Broncho's unit was told to hold Noville so they could get all the Americans in there as much as they could and seal it up. And so that few miles between Noville and Bastogne was an absolute killing field. And Philip Broncho lost his life on that little path. Then fast forward to just a few years ago, we're finishing the book, and a popular weekend holiday event for collectors in Germany, like some people here unnamed, will go to yard sales on the weekends. And in Germany, it's a popular thing to go dig in World War II battle sites and try to find artifacts. They heard about 3 old roadhouses that were being torn down just outside of Noville. And so these 2 young guys, knew the place was going to be torn down any day now. They were making room for new apartments or something. So they said, well, hey, there was a battle here, so let's dig around a little bit. Well, they didn't find anything digging, but they said, hey, what's in this house? They'd been abandoned for years. Not much, but there was a doorway or a hole in the ceiling that went up to the attic. They go up to the attic, and in the corner of one of those 3 roadhouses is Philip Broncho's knapsack. His name is on it. There is documents in there, details about where he was at in those final days of his life, and suddenly a whole new insight into the latter generation of service of these great patriot warriors. I nominated Andrew George, a member of the family, to be a living treasure of Washington. And I'm very pleased to tell you he was Washington's first living treasure for the State Ethnic Heritage Awards. And when I was there the day that Andrew was presented with this award, he was in a wheelchair and dressed beautifully, braids down his shoulders, and gave this very moving speech. The governor was there, a Hollywood celebrity, Cloris Leachman. Don't ask me why she was there. all these interesting folks. And when it was all done, I was wheeling Andrew back across the sidewalk beneath the Space Needle to his car. And I said, Andrew, I just have to ask you, what a day. I mean, whoa, the governor here is speaking on your behalf, and these celebrities, and King TV, he was on TV that weekend, all this stuff. I said, Andrew, what was the most important thing for you this special day? And without hesitation, he looked up at me and he said, Richard, just minutes ago, I heard a bird sing. I have never heard that bird sound before. How remarkable that nature would visit us in this place in such a beautiful way. That's meaning. That's memory. Thank you very much. Thank you, and I know I've gone over time just a little bit. We can maybe take 1 or 2 questions, and then if we need to dismiss everybody, happy to stick around a little while. So any questions, I'd be happy to respond to
I just want to tell you there's some water down below.
Oh, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Tell us about the battleground Stickle Butte. You know anything about that?
Yeah, Lori asked about the Battle of Steptoe Butte, and the battle, of course, I think most of you know, did not happen at Steptoe Butte. It happened, or really, the Rosalia baseball field. And I keep waiting for the. I mean, I grew up by Custer's Last Stand, and of course, everybody in the entire globe celebrates this, for better or for worse, and it's a gigantic tourist attraction. So I'm thinking, hey, maybe one of these days the spirit will catch on, because what an incredible feature that would be. There's a battle sequence that Nona has captured in the paintings, and there's the big controversy about the Steptoe battle is was this Edward Steptoe's brilliant maneuvering to escape with minimal casualties, or did Kamiakin and Gary and the Nez Perce and others, did they just let him go? And one thing I had in my mind to discuss with you tonight, but we don't have time for it, were 3 great myths of the Plateau Wars. And so I'll just impart a quick half-minute one here. Well, one of the myths is that the Plateau people were warlike fighters. It's a myth. I'm not here to tell you they were pacifists, but given the choice between the two, they would have been pacifists. And they had no stomach for annihilating Steptoe's command. They felt they had taught the government a lesson, and that hopefully they would learn from this. And so, in my mind, there is conclusive evidence that they simply let Steptoe head off that night and never intended anything. It is true several of Steptoe's men were killed, but is Malin Crable here tonight from Garfield? You know, Malin has done great research on this. We've recently found the extremely detailed maps that were kept during the Steptoe and Wright campaign, almost the mile-to-mile sketches that were done in microscopic print, by the way. I mean, he's had to have a magnifying glass to read these things. And you see the trail Steptoe was going, and he did not know this. And this is why it's interesting, you know, that these new things come to our awareness. Many of you know on the road north from Pine City up to Cheney, you come to the corner of the Turnbull National Wildlife Refuge. And if you look off to the left, about probably 350 yards, many times you'll see water out there. We call that today Stubblefield Lake. The native people call that Sila, and it means grandmother's lap. That was a wonderful place of rest and springtime root digging. And Steptoe was not apparently aware that the trail he was on was headed directly there. And here are the men camped with their families and young children, and the word comes out, the army is minutes away. I mean, 156 people, they're armed, and they're coming. And that's when Steptoe was met. And the first few hours was just a parley. Just saying, you know, you're on the wrong road here, Buster. We don't know what you're up to. But, this isn't wise to enter our village going where you are. He claimed to be going up to Colville. And of course they knew geography. And Karen and Roy are here. I enjoy talking about the Colville Road, the Mullen Trail. And of course the Colville Road goes due north of Walla Walla country, right up to Fort Colville. So he's like, 80 miles off of the route. And they're saying, they're not buying it. No, you've got something in mind for us. And so there were no casualties until the next day. And Steptoe was very belligerent about it. He turned around and went about a mile and a half and camped. So he didn't leave. It wasn't until the next day, and that's when the young guys were getting nervous and the shots started. So there's still stories to tell about that. Yeah. Something else? Yes.
What's your best guess about population levels prior to the white diseases that came and took these folks?
Yeah, really interesting question, and I'll give I've seen the numbers, but I don't remember the numbers to be precise, the best demographic estimates. I can tell you this, that, but by the way, they were enumerated in censuses from the federal government from the 1850s on that would visit the reservations. So we do have those numbers. And interestingly enough, the decennial censuses sent people up and down the remote country, like the Snake River. Our people here did not move en masse to the reservations after the war. They stayed here. In Indian culture, it's like, well, Chief Kamaikan may have signed that thing. He and his kids can go to the reservation, but I didn't sign that thing, and I'm staying here. And so there was a lot, for like 30 years, those folks I showed you in the rodeo picture, They lived down by El Mota and El Poa till the 1890s. So, and the decennial censuses go to those places and they name who's in the village and everything. It's quite helpful for us working on tribal genealogies. But in the absence of being able to give you a specific number, I will say this. The pretty strong evidence is that after the epidemics of measles and chickenpox and scarlet fever in the 1820s, 1830s, by the mid-1840s, the tribes have been decimated probably 70 to 80%. So that's why I said it was almost a fait accompli before the treaty era ever even started. By the way, Mary Jim told me in one of I have a number of her interviews, actually in another book I don't have here. The most recent I have in the series is called River Song. And Christy, maybe there's a copy over there. Yeah. River Song has Mary Jim's verbatim transcripts. I've gone back and I've typed all those up. And one a very evocative memory. She was telling me about stories she had heard from her parents here in the Lower Snake River. And she said one of the saddest things she heard from her parents was when they would regularly go up and down the Snake River and the Palouse, and they would take firewood and berries and roots to elders who were living in these places still. And she said she heard from her mother or father, I'd have to check, that one of the saddest things was when they would go into these villages, and this would have been like in her parents' time or grandparents' time, and she was talking about the district from mouth of the Palouse River to Pinawawa, El Mota. And they would go into these villages, and everybody would be dead, except maybe one or two wandering children, 5 years old, 8 years old. And she said that to this day when we were visiting with her, brought tears to her eyes. But that's how virulent these contagions were that decimated the tribes. They had no natural immunity to these. By the way, you read in some literature that the reason Marcus Whitman was killed was because of this hostility against him, thinking he was helping the native people. He was a doctor, and by the way, he was genuinely seeking to help the people. But in giving them blankets that had been infected by people traveling on the Oregon Trail, yes, it probably did spread the disease. But to our way of thinking, certainly my background from Euro-American history, that was a falsehood. He certainly did not intend this. Let me tell you, the first time I said the word Marcus Whitman in Mary Jim's presence, boy, did I get a lecture. Yeah, because that is what he was doing. So, these stories are interpreted in various ways, and all of us from our Euro-American perspective have tended to hear it from only one side. And it's very helpful, I think, and enriching for us to hear people's understandings and interpretations from all sides. By the way, I will tell you how humbling it is to be in the presence of Snake River Palouse elders, Kamayakan family elders, who are supremely kind. They harbor no ill will against us for what happened to Kamayakan's grave, to the desecration of the family, to the eviction of their... there's a lot of reasons to be angry. And they are the most generous, kind, and wise people any of us could ever meet. It's a tribute to their statesmanship and integrity. Anything else? Christy, I think we're there.
All right, just a big thank you.